So, so welcome. We are
So
10:06. Here's Ned coming on the scene.
finally, Ned's going to be here.
Finally, Ned is
Hey.
here. Hi, Ned.
So
Hi,
you,
you
so
guys.
Ned, so Ned, you can fit us in among doctor's appointments, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I've actually been very much with my grandkids. One of the joys of my life is to be with my 9 grandkids and been with them a lot because
Good,
parents have been most occupied.
good, good, good.
How are you all?
And, and so, did your grandson pass his driving test?
He did. He did
Oh,
with flying colors.
good.
All right.
Yeah,
That was always traumatic when my kids were getting their driver's license or learning how to drive. We lived out in the country. I mean, really in the country. But I'll tell you, they all three scared the crap out of me sometimes. Just. But fortunately, we were not trying to do it on the LA freeways or anything like that.
yeah.
And
Well,
here comes John Gremer.
Well, we're getting to the stage where we have to worry about getting our renewal test for our licenses.
That is true.
We're getting 5-year, 6-year time periods before we have to renew,
We have 5 years. Yeah,
which is kind of great.
Hello, Johnny.
Good morning.
John.
Hey, John. Good morning, John.
Fred, Bob.
And then next year, aren't they going? The airports aren't they going to require having this federally approved license thing? In California, they call it the real ID
Yeah.
or the real license.
It's either
Well,
that or a passport. If you have
Either
a
that or a
passport,
passport, yeah.
yeah.
So here comes Gary. So,
Hey, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
What nice backgrounds we're seeing. Hi, Gary.
Morning.
Hi, Gary. Hey, Gary. Good morning.
yeah, some of us are really out of it.
I am. I spent the whole day yesterday at the aquarium with all 9 of them.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Jeez.
Yeah,
Is
Long
that-
Beach Aquarium?
The Aquarium of the Pacific in Long
Yeah.
Beach. Yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's
That's a
beautiful.
neat place.
it is. It really, really
Yeah.
is. You know what's really nice is the San Diego Museum of Natural History. That is
Oh, really?
great. Yeah,
Oh,
I love it down there.
Quite a few years ago, Ned, there is a very large RV park within walking distance of the aquarium down there. It's in an area that used to be Pierpoint Landing, back in the day when we were
Oh, yeah.
kids. Yeah. And we stayed out there at that RV park, but it's essentially turned into permanent housing for all of the shipyard employees that have been brought in, to help with the congestion and all that in LA, Long Beach ports. And so it lost a lot of its nice flavor because you've got folks whose families have moved into these RV parks. They live in a big fifth wheel or travel trailer. They junk the place up. And so that's kind of what happens in some of these urban RV parks that were normally for people spending one night or 2 nights, is they become, semi-permanent housing for people who can't afford an apartment, or they're there
mhm,
on contract work for 6 months, and so they bring their trailer. And
mhm.
but it was nice being down there because we visited the aquarium a number of times. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's very close to where Dave Anderson lived. And we used to go, every couple of weeks to restaurants there. He knew everybody, all the major folk in administration of the restaurants, the owners, the managers, it was really
He
something.
had his priorities right, huh?
Boy, he did. Well,
Now,
yeah,
now who is it you're talking about?
Dave Anderson, remember him at all?
don't think so.
He became a priest, and
He was in the class behind us, right?
Yeah. He was very good friends with Barney Gatlin and a few other guys. Gary Kinzer.
Okay.
Yeah.
He left he died though, didn't he? Hasn't he died?
He did. Yeah, he did.
Was he ever did he ever have a parish in the Long Beach area? Because it's a name that's familiar to me from when my mom was alive. Father Anderson is a name that she often, at least in my memory, suggests as the name of a priest that she was close to. But I don't know if he ever was down in Long Beach. Would you guys know?
I don't.
No,
And
you
I
wouldn't know.
talked with him so,
Okay.
a lot of times.
Okay.
He was very down on his time as a priest, I think. And he was in some kind of depression, actually. Fairly deep depression.
I remember when I was in clergy education and I was in charge of our region, and I was in charge of a workshop for new pastors, beginning as pastor, because we were all trained in theology and all that sort of stuff, but we were not trained in the areas of management and administration and that whole kind of thing. And that's what that part of that new pastors workshop was about. But I remember Dave Anderson took that course and or that particular workshop, and they asked, you ask questions about your life and your priesthood and this and that. And I remember him saying, and I never thought about it until he said it. He says, "Well, being a priest is not my whole life." and I had always, I kind of identified myself basically with my priesthood, and it was kind of an interesting perspective until now.
Yeah.
I think being retired, you finally are able to live your life, outside of.
Yeah, at least outside of the ecclesial expectations.
That's a good way of putting it.
Namely,
Good way to put it,
running a
yeah.
parish and relating to people as a representative of the institution,
Well,
whether you like it or not.
and in a way, it's interesting I kind of saw myself stepping back and looking at the church. We grew up in a kind of a ghetto world, and it's interesting to kind of step back and see your upbringing and everything else from a larger perspective, I just think it expands. It's like George Ferrick, you're still a Catholic in so many ways, but you have not limited yourself to one, one denomination,
Yeah,
So
I'm kind of a multi-denominational.
yes, I've seen.
Polydenominational.
Yeah, they use the term interreligious. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Interreligious, yeah.
Polydenomination. Why not?
Well, this,
We should get together with Al Kroll.
that's right. Gary,
Yeah,
what you
right.
just, this morning, Bob, I listened to Mary Novak's talk
Oh, yeah.
that you had recommended, and it's available. And has anybody else listened to it, Mary Novak?
Not yet.
Do you want to describe it, Bob? And then I'll tell you what struck me about it.
It's fresher in your mind because that's 3 weeks
Okay.
ago, and I have not looked at her presentation on the screen here.
So the title of it was, and it fits in with what you're saying, Gary, about decenter and transcend. I guess Pope Francis used that in one of his letters recently. And the idea was open the doors and windows and go beyond where you are, decenter yourself. So it's kind of interesting. It kind of reminded me of the Roncalis, open the window and let the fresh aggiornamento and so forth. Let the fresh breezes in, such as you're experiencing out there at the beach, Bob.
Yeah. You can see the wind blowing the palm tree there.
Yeah. But the idea is to decenter oneself. Kind of what you're saying, Gary, about going beyond, because, it struck me when I resigned at age 33, it was in 1976, that I had always been in a, in quotes, sacred world.
Yeah.
Grew up, went to elementary school, parochial school, altar boy, then to the seminary, and then in the priesthood. And it was like going out into the secular world after having lived in a sacred world. I don't know what your experience was, Frank. All of us did that at various times, except Tom, but you're kind of moving into the secular world in a certain sense.
Well, I've danced around the second world, if you will, as a campus minister, and had how would I say, quite a bit of independence as a campus minister from the structures of the church, as well as a very deep collaboration with a variety of other Catholic and other denominations and religious ministers.
Yeah, so that kind of took you beyond.
Yeah, so it took me a little bit, and I deeply appreciated that. I didn't feel that I was necessarily, as I think a lot of campus ministers are now, necessarily a representative of the institutional traditions.
Just a quick aside. Did you read about the new bishop of
Mongolia?
I can't remember. He had the first Indian American bishop.
Columbus, Ohio.
He just fired the Paulists as the campus ministers.
Yeah.
1 month into his episcopate, he fired the Paulists who'd been there for, I don't know, 75 years or something.
Did he immediately have a replacement, George?
I don't know.
Yeah, he did. He appointed someone to be a priest of the diocese.
From the diocese, from his own diocese, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Were they just too traditional for him, George, or?
Nobody knows. Apparently, well, my brother-in-law told me about it yesterday. We were visiting him.
Well, that brings to mind a story, maybe one of the more interesting stories out of my time in campus ministry, because Roger Mahoney got, what would you say? His ear got captivated by the major donor for the new Catholic Center at UCLA. His name was Cyril Nigg, or Cy Nigg. And he had made his money, I think, as the head of Laura Scudder's potato chips. But Nigg was relating to him the glory days of when UCLA was on the campus at LA City College, and diocesan priests staffed the Newman Center there. And Mahoney got it, since this guy was a big donor for the new thing, he got it in his mind to fire the Paulists. And so he manufactured some egregious liturgical aberrations that the Paulists were supposedly doing at UCLA, and he told me about it beforehand, and I sort of went, He didn't ask for a reaction, but when he sent the letter, it was threatening, and then he told me that he was planning to follow through on it. And I said to him, if you do that, you will be, let's see, Cy Nigg went through there in the early 1930s, late 1920s. If you do that, you will be alienating every single Catholic alum of UCLA subsequent to 1930, including some of the other major donors to this project. So I would suggest that you just kind of be aware of what you're doing. I didn't tell him not to do it, but I did say you would be creating an atmosphere of alienation that you would not be able to recover from. And he thought otherwise of it, and so
Well, good work, Tom.
the Paulists stayed there. So
What kind of fallout?
Pardon me?
What kind of fallout occurred, Tom, if any?
Heard?
Well,
Well,
he fired Tom.
none except that Tom Jones, who was the director there, the Paulist director, when he relented, he had a bunch of red T-shirts printed up with the logo, "I survived the Great Red Scare." But the actual consequence was that he ended up about a year later throwing the Servites out of USC.
Oh, jeez.
And to be honest, I felt that was a good move because the Servites were not sending their best people there, and the Servites were being stretched anyway. He did it in a way that stumbled over his feet, but nonetheless, putting a diocesan priest in there was probably a good move at USC.
Tom, did you have a sense that this was Mahoney himself, or that somebody had his ear?
Well, the UCLA thing was definite that the major ultra-Catholic major donor there, after whom the center was named, but nobody calls it that anymore, had his ear for that. I had a particular list of, I don't know if it's grievances or whatever about the Servites at USC. I would say it was simply that they seem to be marking time there and not doing a great deal.
I see.
That's too bad.
I'll go back to George's thing about this article, uncenter and transcend.
Please.
It's an interesting kind of concept because, men who take a leave from the priesthood have a whole array of ways of dealing that and a reaction to the church, which suggests that none of them really completely uncenter. And so that it can range from the fact that, a friend I knew who never went anywhere unless he was sure that his oils were in his car in case he came upon someone. Now, I was gone for 40 years and I was never put in that situation. There are others who are really angry, but again, it's their anger at the church that kind of forms their life, away from the ministry. And the difficult part, I think, is to enter completely into a life where you're not somewhat owned by the church, but at the same time, you're not unaware that priesthood, even though not practiced, is still an element of who you are. So it's a very complex, it seems to me. And the scandal, it seems to me, is the church is totally absent from any discussion of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be interested in that article because especially the uncenter piece of it, at least, is the first step. I don't know if that's similar to what your experience is, George, or not.
Well, that's interesting because one thing I've been dealing with is since I've been part of these calls, my wife has wondered whether I'm swinging back to the Catholic Church and whether I always wanted to remain a priest and that I regret having left. So that's what she's kind of because I'm spending 2 hours a week. So I'm mulling this over. What am I doing? Because listening to a lot of this news, a lot of it is Catholic oriented. And I kind of decentered from that, you might say. And so I'm kind of mulling that over myself. But I found a very good place to work as a mediator. And Mary Novak's talk, she talks about the really mission of the church is to be peacemaking. And she gets into why she says that, peacemaking. And she mentions all the initiatives that are going on in that area. But I was a peacemaker in families that had experienced an earthquake, which is what you could call a divorce, or a separation where the child no longer has both parents in the same house. Sometimes that's a good thing, but a lot of times it's really very difficult. So I found it very meaningful. So in a certain sense, you could say, Frank, that I found a good expression, because it seems like sacraments happen at crossroads, people's lives, right? If you just number them off, you're born, etc., married or whatever, baptized, confirmed, there's always a crossroads involved, anointing of the sick. So I was at the crossroads of people's lives for a little sliver, just a little sliver of it. But people would go through. The whole point was to help see if people could come up with peace in a situation that naturally has conflict built into it. So in a certain sense, I found myself expressing my ministry in that regard, without wearing a collar, without being an institutional person.
Right.
And some people I didn't go around touting that I was a priest or anything like that, because doing that, all of a sudden people relate to you in a different way. I wanted people to relate to me as who I was, without that label. But I very much did decenter. So when people talk about the Eucharist being a sign of unity, they're talking about Catholic unity. They're not talking about unity with Buddhists or other people. My idea of unity goes beyond Catholicity. It's broader than that.
It's interesting because I didn't consciously dissenter as such, but found myself times saying, I wonder, like I was the director of the business ethics program at Northrop Grumman. And so I was trying to teach, in many instances, people the tension in making an ethical decision. And sometimes when I sat back and thought about it, I thought that almost unconsciously, I was coming down on the side of Kant more than John Stuart Mill, and wondered whether that was because of my Catholic background in teaching and moral theology. The other thing I found is that people, when you're a priest who has left and people who know that, they may treat you differently, but they don't treat you exactly as a priest, because there's a certain tone in that you've taken their part and kind of come over to their side.
Yeah.
Which has a very interesting influence, it seems to me, in terms of people, and I think to some extent, some guys kind of abuse that a little bit. They play in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas if that's how you're seen and how people approach you, the possibility is always there that they'll pull you aside and say, hey, can you talk to me about this a little bit? Without you saying, here I am, what I used to be. And so, come to me for this, that, or the other thing. So I think it's extraordinarily complex, and I'm not sure of anyone who's really dealt with it.
That really is. See, when I was at UNICAL, one of the notations on my curriculum vitae was that I had been in the seminary, and all of these very bright lawyers somehow found out about it. I don't think there was a lawyer there that didn't know that I had been in the seminary for so long, actually, and that I had a master's degree from this seminary. And some were very disdainful. Some were ridiculing even.
Really?
And I think some of that was mixed up with my ethnicity. Some guys from Texas who were very bright guys, but very disdainful and ridiculing of me, and you know, in very indirect, oblique ways, but very clear. Others came, and there was a really bright woman from Nigeria who had been to Harvard and Princeton and Stanford for her education, came to me and said, can I talk with you privately? And I said, sure. And she said, I'm pregnant and I've been living a life of just complete abandon. I've been disciplined all my life, and my parents are very, very good Catholics. And I find myself now just in pieces. So she wanted to talk about recentering and now what in her life. And then I had people who were curious and thought that that to be a pastor or to be a priest meant all of the externals. You know, they'd ask me about Mass and all of the things, the sitting and the standing and the kneeling and all of those external kinds of things. It was just this hodgepodge of responses or reactions to that information, that experience that I had, and their regard or their perspective of what that meant. It was amazing. You're right, Frank. I think it's amazingly complex.
I don't like the metaphor of centering or decentering.
I don't either.
Because what we're all supposed to be as people, let alone Christians, is self-transcending. And in order to be self-transcending in a certain sense, you have to have an authentic self.
Absolutely.
And so when you meditate, in some sense, you're bringing yourself into a space where you can try to be more open to what God wishes, and to in a certain sense relate to God as a person, not as decentered, but as you. And the struggle is to be self-transcendent, and you need God's help to do that. And the help is really given to you. In other words, it's interpersonal. Be interpersonal, but not be decentered in some space where God knows what is outside the center, so to speak, or what is the center. So in other words, there's a way in which I like the metaphor of being open rather than closed. That's just my preference, but
I think it's more than a preference, Fred. I think that's really the center of it all.
Well, I think, Fred, I think maybe, at least that's a really good point, because I think in the initial part of the discussion, we kind of, what I heard about decentering was more disentangling than going to the center of your person type of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So, which adds kind of an enormous help when you put it in terms of centering and the transcendent person, then disentangling is very different from decentering.
I just
That makes
wonder
sense?
if
Huh?
the term focus might fit. The ability to focus here, there, and adjust, and not be just one focus, but multi-focus.
Well, I think Fred's talking about not losing your sense of self because you've made this transition.
Mhm.
Am I right, Fred?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you're good at making the best of what I said.
Sorry about that.
No, that's good.
Fred, one thing, Fred, as you're talking, Lonergan's expression, the moving viewpoint. I think that's what I got out of Pope Francis is saying about decentering, kind of move into somebody else's reality. Don't just stay in your box, but the moving viewpoint, you don't lose your own center, but it expands somewhat. Something like that.
I agree
Yeah,
with you on that, George, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to her. She is a very trained Jesuit spiritual director. I mean, she's been through the whole program. She's also a lawyer, and she has been into death executions and all the rest of it. But when I hear about that centeredness, it's that she is critiquing that we need to decenter because we come so much invested in me, and if we're so centered in me, then I'm not really paying attention to the larger world that I'm part of. That's what I got out of her. But I'm going to go back and listen because maybe
No, it's worth listening to. And I think a good example of not being decentered was last night in the hearings. The gentleman whose initials are DT, he really didn't decenter. He's never decentered from his reality. He gets up and he makes a statement about the riots, and he just starts talking out about how this election has been stolen from him, and it's not really the other people or the bad guys, and he just isn't decentered at all from his ego, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
He's stuck in it. He's so stuck in it that he can't even speak the words of a speech without revising it somewhat to
So what I've been thinking about this week, and that I thought last week with Bob was it just raised so many things on my mind. And I think, Frank, you had said something. Someone had used a term when it comes to, when does a human being actually come into being? They used a term ensoulment. And I don't know if that was a word that you guys have always been familiar with. And so I've been praying on that and thinking about it. And it was not a concept that I knew about. Is the idea of ensoulment, does that mean that period of time in fetal development where God infuses a soul into that thing? Is that what the term essentially means? Because yeah. So what do you guys? Because it really has been going around in my mind. Is I always had thought that the soul was infused at the moment of conception, but then there was a conversation last week where and I think Fred Lawrence, you had talked about the Aristotelian idea about the form must be receptive to that process. And so it's just got me just all turned around here. Does the soul is it our belief that the soul enters into that embryo at the moment of conception or at some later state? Does anybody have an opinion?
Well, I think I know from what the little that I understand is that you don't, the question that we ask is, when does human life begin? When
Yes.
does that fetus become a human person? And I don't, scientifically, that's not known. I don't know. I mean, maybe some of you might know better than I do, but the church always took what they call that position that they call the safer part. You know, we don't know, but we'll kind of presume that you're on solid ground if you just presume that from the beginning. That's how I've always understood it.
Benefit of the doubt.
Well, I remember when we were in Rome, Bob and George and Fred, the casuists, the Catholic moral theologians like Marcelino Zalba. Father Zalba would always talk in class. I can hear him and see him now. He was a really nice man. He was medieval, but he was very nice. And he would his bumper sticker was the Tutsi or Page.
Yeah.
Which
That means
in that
sacred
whole
Catholic.
school of moral theology, that became kind of like the intellectual directive, if you will. And that's why it seems to me we've got all these controversies today about proportionalism and, the fundamental option for God and all that kind of thing. It was just beginning, actually. Those things were just beginning when we were studying moral theology. So in one year we had Marcelino Zalba talking about the Tutsi or Pars, and the next year we had Joe Fuchs talking about the more pastoral and open fundamental option for God. So go ahead, George.
Yeah, I have a funny story. Can I intervene here about
Yes.
Father Zalba? You may not realize it, St. John seminaries, but I don't remember ever doing a written exam in Rome. There were a meeting with the professor. Do you remember that? You go in.
I remember written ones too, but the big thing was the verbal.
Yeah. So I remember going into Zalba for my moral exam thing, and I flunked it because the question that I was asked was about angels in the Old Testament. And I hadn't put that at the top of my priority list as relevant to the parishioners I would be working with. And so I go off for my summer, and I went down to Malaga, Spain. There was a place there called Hermandad Europea. So that really enhanced my Spanish speaking going down there. So I come back for my exam in the fall, and there I am being asked these questions. And the answers I'm giving are part Latin, part Spanish, and part Italian in my final exam. It was just a riot. Yeah,
Did you pass?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I passed. As a matter of fact, the best field I came out doing was in moral theology, which was surprising to me. So it was interesting.
Where you came
Well,
out best, George?
Huh?
The point of
You came out best with moral theology.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Yeah, we didn't have very much about that, did we?
No.
I mean, we had Zalba and then we had Fuchs.
Yeah, Fuchs. Yeah, Fuchs was very good. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I think then it was boom. You were done.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Well, both Zalba and Fuchs were on the commission advising Paul VI on Humanae Vitae. And Zalba apparently in one meeting was protesting if we changed the teaching, what happened to all the people who went to, I don't know if he exactly put it in those terms, went to hell in the past because they practiced birth control. And pungently, but rather cruelly, because Father Zalba was a nice man. Patty Crowley from Chicago said to him, Father Zalba, how sure are you that the Lord followed your orders with those people?
the what?
the Lord followed your orders and sent those people to hell.
Oh,
Which in an interesting way is the debate between him and Fuchs.
Well, what was
But
his response to
we carried
Mrs.
the
Crowley?
decision of Paul VI. Zalba carried that decision.
Right.
And
Yeah, I
that's
can remember Zalba talking about the 26 types of bestiality, and I was thinking to myself, he's not even aware that people aren't lining up to go to confession. That was my kind of, his sense of moral theology and the relevance of it.
Much less have sex with a crocodile.
Yeah, that's 27, George.
Yeah, that's putting your life in danger.
Now, who's that? What was the story we heard
it's
about?
your
Some researcher.
coming back to Tim's question though. In order to have a human being, teaching is you have to have a body and soul. And then you have a human nature. But the human nature is a principle of motion and rest. That's what nature is, a principle of motion and rest in the thing that exists. So part of the problem with talking about ensoulment is having this kind of fixed idea of what a soul is, rather than something that really has to do with the integration of all the different things that Tom's more up about than most of us, I think, in terms of brain, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a way in which the church emphasized things that would be fixed, because there was this idea that if you thought things in more dynamic ways, then what would happen to a lot of teachings that we've taught before? But that's not true. And so what the church has to be is a learning church, not just a church fixed on things that basically they're impossible to understand for most human beings.
Mhm.
And so the church has to be more open, I think. And I think what Francis is doing when he talks about decentering is really wanting to talk about being open in a way that he is open.
Mhm.
And his openness is related to his notion of discernment, which is very Jesuit. And discernment is something that's ongoing. It's the meditation on the movements of the spirit. You're talking each day about thinking about the way you reacted throughout the day. When did you experience dismay? When did you experience happiness or joy? And what was going on in those different emotions and so forth and so on. It's not something that's just fixed. And I think this is an awful problem for the church. And so many people are kind of scandalized. Like I'm sure Father Zalba was pretty scandalized when that fellow made that comment about following your orders. We're not in charge. And we have to keep learning, because most things that we need to understand are really take a lot of time and study to figure them out. And if you have these sort of already fixed answers to things that you don't understand anyway, that's not going to help a learning church, it seems to me.
Yeah, I at 10:04 this morning sent you guys 2 articles. If I'd been more organized, I would have sent them at 10:04 last night. You might have found time to read them. But one is entitled "The High Abortion Cost of Human Reproduction," and I think that is the leading authority for the proposition that there are so many spontaneous abortion. The guy teaches at UC Santa Barbara, and he wrote this article, and he contends that 50% of pregnancies and spontaneous abortions to miscarriages. So it's an interesting article. It hasn't been peer reviewed yet, but there it is. And I think I would bet that's the authority on which our guest last week, and I didn't send it to him just because I couldn't remember his name.
Okay.
What is it?
Bob Charpentier.
Charpentier. Okay. Now I got to figure out how to spell it, but Tom will help me with that. All right, but he's the statistician on the question. The second article is from Patheos, which is a Catholic magazine, right? And it's entitled "Spontaneous Abortions in Moral Theology." And that's the article I think that's really on point for at least the.
However, George, that article did not come through in your email.
It didn't?
It did not.
The second one didn't know.
Oh, I said it's not attached. Well, that's easy to fix. I'll fix it. But he argues that this has big theological implications. So I won't try to summarize it. I'll just send it to you all.
That would be good because, I think certainly with Bob Charpentier and many of the rest of us, including the fact that if, quote, ensoulment, which I think is Tim, I think that's a real problematic concept because it comes from a time when the soul was seen as that which is responsible for everything else that you cannot quite figure out by physical sciences about what the body does. And now physical sciences have figured out all of those functions that formerly were attributed directly to the soul. Now we have to say, well, in some ways, soul as life principle may well still be valid, but all of these functions, like memory and many of the cognitive processes, all of the cognitive processes really are done actually by identifiable, electrical activity in the brain and so on. So, the concept of a soul being infused into the body, I think, is not one that actually does justice to what the relationship of the life principle and the body might actually be. So I think we need a different word. When I was having my treatment for prostate cancer, some of you probably have experienced this too. The radiation was on the ground floor of the City of Hope building, and what was on the upper floor but the infusion laboratory with all of these beds. And infusion basically means that you are inserting something else into something, like infusing chemicals that hopefully will poison the cancer before it poisons you. So I think that, that's to my mind not the most helpful way of looking at it. The other thing is if ensoulment happens at the moment of conception, then we have to explain why is it God's will, and we can't just skirt that and say, well, that's a mystery in the mind of God. God's will is manifested in creation. Therefore, God's will is that half of the human life that he has created spends eternity in limbo, which no longer exists. So, it's just not a helpful way of considering it. Also, twinning. If the zygote, as an individual human entity, which it is also an individual human person, then at some point, soon in its development, it becomes two individual persons. Does the soul split in half? Or does God say, "Uh-oh, that now is too. I'd better prepare another soul. Come on, this uh, this vat of souls, unborn souls that I've got here. Now we'll infuse you in." I'm caricaturing it a bit, but you know,
Oh, really?
I think those are a couple of problems that the medievals really did not have to face because they were completely unknown to any science until the last 100 years or so.
You know, Tom, I've grappled with this abortion thing ever since I used to represent the right to lifers back in the 70s. And I've never thought of this in terms of when is a soul infused.
Hmm.
You know, it just strikes me as an artificial,
Yeah.
I guess, medieval question. I mean, when is this entity a human being or a human person? That to me is the question, but I never think of soul. I think of essence. So I don't know.
I think, George, that's probably, how do you say this? I don't know how St. Thomas Aquinas said it, but I always got the impression that what he was really saying was that whatever we know about God, we know what by analogy. I mean, it's like saying this is the least incorrect way of saying something. You know,
Least incorrect, good.
you know, of saying something about all that. And it's like, I think I prefer what you're saying, because we don't, as Tom has beautifully pointed out, just to say, when is that a human person? When it is a human being is the kind of, that's the question we have to ask, really, more than, as you say, when is the soul infused? I think, Tom, that was very interesting. I'm glad I'm joining part of this group. I don't read books that much. I just get a lot more from conversations. This is wonderful.
Well, because that question, Gary, cannot be easily answered, it seems like a little bit of humility would be in place.
Yes.
Amen.
So,
On both sides.
So when we turn to the real world, last week I read an article, maybe some of you did, in the New York Times by some doctors about what happens when a 10-year-old is pregnant and has to, the physiological difficulties of that 10-year-old to carry a child and then give birth, just the bone development and other things, and just the difficulty of it. And out of curiosity, because a lot of states are so strict, that abortion is no incest, no rape, none of that will be, pregnancies in those situations. You still can't, you have to, bear the child. So that a woman in those states almost has to say to herself, however I'm impregnated, I must bear that to term. That's kind of what a lot of women are facing. So being an outlier, I kind of decentered myself and I inserted this in my Google search. Have nuns been raped and have they had abortions? I put that in my Google search. I came up with the PBS. I came up with the PBS segment on it, that in some countries
In Africa,
the rape of women of nuns is not negligible, and that they were advised by their church authorities to have an abortion. So here's a church on one hand, or at least part of the church, kind of with people having this very hard and fast approach to this whole thing, and then in reality, when it comes down to affecting them, they make exceptions. So I found that very interesting.
if we're going to insist, if we, the Catholic Church, are going to insist that 10-year-old girls who have been raped cannot have an abortion, we have no chance of winning this debate. We just forget it. Run up the white flag. I mean, how inhumane is that?
Well, okay, George, Crook, I'm confused. Inhumane, what does that word mean? Is it inhumane to the little 10-year-old girl, or is it inhumane to the, use Samuel Alito's words, the unborn human being?
The unborn human, it's inhumane to the little kid, to the girl.
Well, what is it to the baby in the womb? What word would you use to describe that?
Well, the baby should not be there to begin with.
Well, bullshit.
It
It's
shouldn't be
there.
there to begin with.
Well,
But not the baby's
Yeah.
fault. Kevin.
yeah,
but you
but you know, stepping back and taking a holistic picture, in the case of an abortion there, that baby would, in a sense, be joining the 10 billion others who have been victimized by the natural processes and been part of a spontaneous abortion.
Right.
Now, you know, I think the obligation of how you make that decision does have to take into consideration a much broader set of considerations than simply the life of the unborn, or perhaps the life of the 10-year-old child. There are many contexts that do need to go into a moral decision without actually descending into simple moral relativism, whatever the hell you feel like is okay. No, that's not the question here. But the question really is taking a variety of principles, somehow or other you have to come up with a practical decision. And sometimes it may need to be doing what you know is wrong, but prescinding from whether it is justified or not. It does need to be, how would I say, the decision itself can be a good decision, even if it is to choose something bad in relation to other things that are bad.
That's what being justified is.
One last thing here. I think it's a problem when we try to see justification in terms of black and white, either or.
Right. I mean, it's
Well,
akin.
but you're
It's
gonna
akin
have
to
a
the.
law.
It's akin to the situation of the couple, the woman who's divorced and remarried. Do you make a pastoral decision? Do you absolutely say to her, goodbye? That's the end of it. Yeah. So the decision's off of me. I don't need to help you with it. It's already been made by someone up there.
Yeah.
Or, in fact, do you have to bring to bear kind of pastoral considerations on the thing, which considers the whole gamut of things, and not immediately say yes or no? Mm-hmm. And I think it goes back to what Fred was talking about people being stuck in like ensoulment, being that's a reality. Well, it's a category that something happens at this moment in time and it's over, and then something else happens. It's not a process. It's not a, I've been in the hospital a lot this past few weeks. I have sisters, by the way, John, and I'm not sure that I agree with what you said about twins, but at any rate, one of them had 9 hours of surgery on Monday.
Oh, yeah.
And for a tumor in her behind her eyes, in her sinus area. Okay. And I've had major surgery also. And I come to the question as to whether or not is the surgeon, for example, who knows that the person on the table is facing life or death, and that he plays a critical role in it, does the circumstances even allow him to think of that as a task that's done and over with? Something that's done, period, and that's it. Or does the whole process kind of impress upon him that even though he goes in as a physician, is there some point in that process that something larger than simply doing the process well comes into play? And I'm not sure that we, for instance, I had a course in the seminary while I was there in my second shift. And the professor, it was on church and state. And he was very good, but he went through, his principle was that in the development of doctrine, you had to respect exactly what went before. And he went through this whole process of trying to show how Dignitatis Humani on religious freedom was consistent with all of the condemnations of Pius IX in the Syllabus of Errors. Now, it's only through some kind of mental gymnastics that you even approach getting there, let alone understanding that, put that aside and let's look at a whole other way, as a process thinking, if you will, in terms of how we get from A to B, and whether or not in the process we can be faithful to the tradition. It seems to me that this is the debate we're in the middle of.
Frank, the word or the idea to be pastoral is a very elusive thing for me. To me, to be pastoral, I am all for, and I guess it's just in my DNA. Sometimes I get overly emotional or identified with a situation, and I begin to make decisions that are not sometimes consistent with, the static kinds of concepts that we've been told we need to use to stay in the grace of God. Divorce is one that's just right dead center in what does it mean to be pastoral. Abortion is another one, and it just goes on and on. What does it mean to be pastoral? Richard Rohr, very famously, at least in my mind, has said we have two phases in life. If we continue to apply ourselves, pray, attempt to grow, and as Fred said, nothing is, well, I'm not sure about nothing, but that the church is continuing to discern. And you get to that point in life where discernment is not made by static principles in these areas that we're talking about. So where are we? There's got to be, and there is, I believe, a principle that would guide us in making those decisions. And to me, that's got to be the love of God, to, loving us, calling us, and then our responding to that love. I don't know any other way to define what it means to be pastoral. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? But that's, George asks Herbie, Father Herb Ryan, well, that doesn't fit. And he says, oh, that's canon law. We're talking about pastoral theology here. Well, that's a facile way of blessing some decision. Has anybody, I'm sure we've all thought about this, but any guidance, any thoughts about it? Because that's what we're using, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Ned, I don't know if it's relevant, but George, didn't you give an example of you, Ned, or maybe you talked about it when you were feeling you were in the hospital or some crisis was going on, and a priest came and gave you the anointing of the sick.
Yes.
And it was so minimalistic that he did something and left, and you were left, what the hey, and then another priest came in and was pastoral.
Yes.
So there's something, so you could contemplate what the difference was between your two experiences. But I think if I were a priest and I knew something about the biology of a 10-year-old or this bone structure and all that, I just wouldn't come out and say, no, you can't do that. That's a, pound my fist and say that's a mortal sin if you do that. It would be a lot different. And there's temperament. People have different temperaments. There might be a mother that say, sure, I will bear the fetus to birth and give birth regardless of whether it's from rape or not. But then another person could say, I just can't handle that. That's not in my makeup. That's not. So I think pastoral is about listening, and I don't know, it's about letting the person, Bob, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about conscience. And Pope Francis in a message after Nancy Pelosi visited him and she received communion, he talked about conscience. He says, I'm not going to forbid that. There's a matter of conscience. So it seems like being pastoral recognizes that in other people, that they may have some right in making a decision about stuff that affects their own life.
Well, but here, I mean, what Tim is thinking is broad social policy. And, let's pretend we're all philosopher kings sitting in some legislature. And now a bill is being introduced to regulate the practice of abortion in our state. And it'll have, various sections. And one of them will deal with, or may not deal with, abortion in cases of rape, or abortion in cases of rape of a minor. How would we vote on that statute?
Sure.
Seems like Tim would vote to, not allow the kid to have an abortion. I would vote.
I don't know, George. I don't know that I would vote that way.
It's not irrational.
No. I don't know that I would, and that's why, Gary, you made a comment that, if you have a referendum in the state of California on abortion issues, you have to prayerfully consider how you're going to vote on that. George, I don't know, why does this issue, and you would know because you've been involved in litigation, why has this issue become politicized? Why is the decision of a woman, why has it entered into the legal arena? Is it because we believe, okay, and this is my question, do we believe and do we hold that a fetus has a legal right to existence? Is that what the purpose of the law is to legally protect the fetus? Because we envision or we believe that fetus is simply, as Alito said, just simply an unborn human being. If that's and so that's why I don't know how I would vote, George, because I would say if you're going to vote that way, then what do we do? I mean, are we going to
shower ready? Do you know first?
If someone, what if in an accident that was caused by someone else, a fetus dies, are we going to prosecute the person who did it for the murder of an unborn human being? And so there's a lot, I don't know how I would vote, because it seems to me there's a tremendous amount of inconsistencies. Yeah, there's a lot of inconsistencies.
Absolutely.
Does the unborn human being in any state have any legal right? If they go ahead.
There have been decisions about responsibility for
fetal homicide,
for murder, for negligent homicide of fetuses, of babies, when an accident occurs, or when a murder occurs, an attempted murder of a mother, and the mother doesn't die, but the fetus dies, and then there's a recognition that that life in there deserved protection, and the guy who attempted murder commits some kind of homicide.
Yeah, but in those cases, that fetus in there deserves protection only because the mother wanted it to have it,
That's
not
right.
because it deserved it in se.
And so now we're again in the area of some kind of relativity, and so it seems to me that this pastoral kind of thing that we're talking, or that I would brought up, and that we've all been talking about. How do we make decisions in situations like the 10-year-old?
But Ned, if I can interrupt, we've been
Please.
dragged from the pastoral into the legislative.
We have.
And Tom's quote about the priest who said, "Oh, but that's just canon law," is very apt here. It seems to me, without a lot of thinking about it, that the pastoral is a certain sense in which you're faithful to the ethos, if you will, or the outlines of your tradition, but apply to the particular situation the mercy of God, which may be different.
Yes.
And it's the opposite of the tutsior pars. It's the riskior pars.
Yes. And so that there's two things, at least in my pea brain, that are engaged here. One is the dynamics between the person needing help and the person wanting to love this person that needs help. There's a dynamism going there. And then occurs the need to take responsibility. You don't say, well, here's the law as I understand it. You will fit into that hole, that square peg. Or the person who's being asked for love makes a decision, takes the responsibility to apply the love of God as that person understands it, as
But what's that got to do with the law?
It transcends the law. I don't believe that. I think that there are areas where you cannot legislate. I don't think that there are. There are situations where you just can't clearly say, this is the way it is, and you shall obey it under pain of some kind of consequence.
Well, talk to your son, talk to all the other pro-lifers, because they're hell bent to do exactly that.
Yeah, George, I know, of course. Yeah. But the point is that we're trying to, at least I'm trying to determine when this applies and when doesn't it apply, and how best to apply it. There are folks who are not, let's get a little traditional here, who aren't holy, let's say, who aren't prayerful.
I've met some.
Who aren't, they don't care about God. And they need to make a decision, and they base it on a political idea. They want to win their election. And so they go from one position to another, and the basis for that decision is their own self-interest. So their decision-making, I don't believe, is in any way related to the love of God.
No, but we have representative government in this country. No, it's not. But that we have representative government in this country, and there they sit.
Yeah, of course we sit, but
they. Well, okay,
so,
we all sit.
So
then, of course, what we have is we need to get together and discover what, in this issue, as in many others, is a compromise that, in some ways, people whose leanings are to one side or the other, without being polarized in the extreme, the exclusive extreme, what is a sort of compromise that we can live with?
Well, I agree with that.
Both sides are going to say there is no compromise.
They certainly are going to say
They do say that. But legally, socially, politically in this country, the only healthy thing that we can do is to say, okay, what sort of legal framework can we live with? And neither side seems willing to do that.
And that's,
Yeah, that's very true.
and that's my question is, I mean, because unless, and Tim, you're right. And George, I mean, Tom, those of us who live in California, I mean, I read, maybe I haven't read it since, that they want to pass some sort of constitutional amendment to
It's
make.
going to be on the ballot in August, I think.
Yeah, August or November, I don't know. But anyway, so it's like we're in the same position now as Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi about, because the question is, just because something is immoral, should it also be illegal? And like one person wrote a thing in our local paper here, a letter to the editor, said, look, all we're asking for is the opportunity to make the choice. You know,
Yeah,
well, that's what this person wrote.
yeah, I know.
Can I make the choice to do this and not be subject to, you know, the law or whatever you want to call it, you know, to be
Prosecuted.
be, by the way, but I mean,
This
so the question-
amendment, Gary, goes much further than that, though. It's what the pro-choice forces are doing every time is they get some very extreme proposition of law or thought, and 1% of abortions are, in the 9th month or something, but we're going to include that protection as part of the. If one votes yes,
it's going to make it hard to figure out exactly.
Well, on the other hand, my calculus, I'll say, well, late-term abortions are so rare that de facto they don't much matter, if they matter at all. But if they're so unimportant, then why are the pro-choice forces so adamant about it? Something that would strike most people as utterly barbaric.
George, I think one reason why they may be so adamant is, and I think this is both sides of the extreme position. One reason they're so adamant is simply that they see the danger of what they will call a slippery slope.
That's certainly true. I agree with that.
If you put any kind of restrictions on abortion into the law, the one side is going to say, that's a slippery slope to The Handmaid's Tale. And
yeah,
if you allow any possible leeway for choice and for abortion in certain circumstances, the other side is going to say, well, that's a slippery slope to unrestricted abortion on demand. And you got both sides yelling at each other, but not saying, well, can we come together and figure out something that we can live with?
And neither can, because they're both, it's a war of absolutes.
That's right.
I would like to go back to Ned's question about what's meant by pastoral. And when he asked that question, I thought about the time when my father, he had a terrible headaches for years and years, because when he was in the Navy in the Philippines, he was doing liaison on some Philippine island, and Japanese planes were coming and strafing. And he dove under a Jeep and he struck his head. And ever since that happened, he had a terrible, terrible headache. He finally had to go to the doctor, go to the hospital. And he himself, I think he had been a Catholic, but he was, as we say, fallen away. And at any rate, I was not only a Catholic, but a seminarian. So when one of my parish priests found out about it, he came to visit my dad. And one thing I noticed not only in terms of the way he was with my father, that people in the hospital that were just sitting around waiting for what happened to their relatives and so forth, they stopped him and they wanted to talk to him. They wanted him to hear their confession. And I know there are other kinds of priests who nobody would say that to them just because they were there. You see what I'm trying to say? So in other words, there are people who come to the hospital and pray for the person and maybe give them extreme unction or whatever they call it, the anointing. And it means all the world to them. But there are others for whom it seems like the priest is just going through the motions. So you don't really have a recipe for what's pastoral. You have the person who really is serious about their faith and holy, who understands that they're not the center of the universe, but God is, and so forth. And when people are that way, people who need them respond to them. But other people, they're not that way, and people don't have that response to them. So it's a pretty mysterious thing what being pastoral really is.
If you don't mind, can we go to Gary Lombardi, who I think exemplifies the pastoral side that you're describing? Do you feel that way about yourself, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my person, there's kind of an openness about me, I think. And I always thought in a way, though, that people would say to me, is there a pastoral solution here? What they really mean is, Father, can you just give permission for it? I mean, can you just give permission? But in the, and really, especially in the area of, now with regard to abortion, I never had, the only few times I've had to deal with it, I've had to deal with it a number of times. I could never counsel it. I could never counsel it, but it was never the situation like that little 10-year-old girl. It was not like that at all. But for me, most of the time, it's in the area of, divorce and remarriage and receiving communion, even though you're married outside the church and all that sort of stuff. And so the pastoral solution, would be like to say yes, I guess, but I think my personality is such, I'm sure Tom's is the same. And all of you would, I think everybody here, everybody in this group, if they were in active Roman Catholic priesthood ministry, would be considered pastoral. But you're pastoral in the jobs that you did, whether you taught or was a lawyer or did mediation. I mean, I think we're all pastoral people. Does that make sense? I don't know. That's how I think. Anyway. And I agree with you, Fred. I think a lot of it has to do with with an individual. I mean, the person's personality, if you will, or the character, the style. I don't know how else to say it. I identify it with the Second Vatican Council. That's what I identify. When they talk about Vatican II priests and John Paul II priests or whatever we've got these days, I always think that the pastoral style, if you want to put it that way, is in line with what the Second Vatican Council was about. There was a pastoral council. I mean,
and I think the thing about the John Paul II priest is a distortion. If you read his document, landmark document, it's named Pastores Dabo Vobis.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 4 areas of formation for men in formation to be priests and for priests, ongoing formation: human, spiritual, academic, and pastoral. And the order of that, if you go in seminaries in this country, that order isn't maintained. But John Paul II said that human formation is the basis of all priestly formation. And so it leads through the spiritual and academic to the pastoral. It's the human formation, it seems to me, that comes out and that's absent with the priest who goes in. And, you know, when I was a deacon many years ago, I was in Liverpool, England, and nobody had telephones. Old people living alone in these kind of old English buildings. Sometimes everything around it was blown to smithereens by the Second World War. Kind of not an attractive landscape. So I went out to do 10 visits with communion on one time. And I came back 3 hours later. And the priest in the rectory said to me, "Where the hell were you?" I said, "I was doing my communion calls." He said, "I do that in less than 45 minutes. But what happened was, they don't have telephones, they're isolated. They love the Lord and they're delighted to receive communion, but they also want to have a cup of tea with you and talk to you. And if you miss that, you're missing an essential element of what it means to be pastoral and what, to his credit, John Paul II thought it meant to be pastoral."
Amen.
You know, just cut maybe out of left field. George Ferrick, back in your counseling days, being a psychologist, suppose a family came to you and with a 10-year-old girl who'd been raped a few weeks ago and by now knew she was pregnant. And the parents are saying, you know, little Georgina here insists on carrying that child to term. And we think it'll be a disaster for her psychologically and emotionally for the rest of her life. And we're her parents, and that she won't agree. And could you counsel her, Mr. Ferrick? And so you go through whatever steps you have to go through, and you determine that your client or patient is the little girl, not the parents, and all your duties run to her. So the parents leave the room, and she folds her arms across her chest and says, "I'm not going to have that abortion. What? I mean, why should I?" And she looks at you, and it's your turn to speak. I mean, how would you proceed?
I guess I would I would send him to a OBGYN, send him to a doctor and have say, "Come back to me after you visit Dr. Dr. Barbara Smith. She's a good OBGYN. Go and talk to what's involved and then come back and we'll have another meeting." Or go to 2 doctors, if you want to do that and find out more about it. Because it could be, the little girl could have been carrying the American doll around, for years and all that, and having a real baby appears pretty attractive, but it's a 10-year-old view of it. So have her talk to somebody else who aren't her parents to get more information. Who might be able to, or talk to a pediatrician. Talk to the pediatrician for the girl. So I would have them get more information. Kind of broaden the scope of things. Yeah.
Now, fast forward is 3 weeks later, and she has another appointment with you.
Right. And then see what they say. But I would help them see if they can come up with the resolution to it by talking more.
Yeah, for one thing, I think at age 10, the parents have to be involved in that decision.
That's probably true legally.
I can see that 2 parents who have a good family life and the poor little girl was raped, with otherwise a good family, they might say, we really want to be part of caring for this baby who will be our first granddaughter. And we love our daughter and we love the baby. Well, that is obviously going to lead to one decision. The other side is two parents who really don't give a shit about either this daughter or the potential granddaughter. And very possibly, and one of the areas that I have counseled some people in at some length have been the incestuous rape. It's interesting. I've had two cases where the youngest daughter of a family was repeatedly incestuously raped by her father when the mother entered menopause. And and that is probably more common than any of us think. And there you've got an excruciatingly dysfunctional family and absolutely no environment with which to respect the life of the baby who you would insist has to be brought into the world. So, those things kind of have to be factored into what sort of a decision we might help the person come to.
But what about something in between, like two Catholic parents who just think abortion's an abomination and are going to do their best with this to help their daughter raise this result of rape child, and they're so convinced that if they could, and they can't, I guess, in California, they would force the daughter to have to carry the child to term.
And if their parents are so one-sidedly, adamantly, brutally, you might say, pro-life, are they going to provide any kind of environment that will bring up the child, because they probably were very, very conservatively restrictive of their existing daughter. Again, there is a context that I think has to go into a prudential decision, including, to what extent do you respect the decision-making capabilities of the 10-year-old? To what extent?
But if this family lived in Ohio, there wouldn't be any of that.
Well, that's, again, we're kind of going from the pastoral to the legal here.
Yeah.
So I'm just affirming that there's a broader context.
Right. I think that, and that's very important because, there are in fact instances where you had a Catholic family like what Tom is describing, where in fact both the mother and the child, had very good productive lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the presumption that in every case that's going to be a disaster isn't necessarily a valid presumption.
Even in rape cases.
Well, rape, that's a different case. So you're being very lawyerly now. You're saying you're adding in the elements.
No, but I think you can't overlook the physical dimensions. There's, is there a higher risk of mortality?
Yes.
You have to get very granular.
Right.
What is the physique of the girl?
Right.
How much does he weigh? How much?
Right.
I think all these things that a doctor who has been involved would have to say is something that the doctor would have a duty to let the parties know what the reality is.
No, that's not the question. The question is, do we have a presumption as to what the doctor is going to say when we go in? That's more in line with our position on abortion than it is on what's good for the young woman.
Well,
and I think that's part of the pastoral role, I think.
It's just
to raise that issue and to recognize it if the family brings it forward, that there is in fact a good chance. Now, I'm not presuming on the other one either that this is going to pop up as being true in every case, But it seems to me we have to be open as pastors to the possibility that it is true. That's a pastoral role.
Yeah. I
Well-
mean, as I said last week in this parental notice litigation, the ACLU tried to make it a virtual presumption that, let's say a Catholic kid gets pregnant or a fundamentalist Protestant kid gets pregnant. These parents are brutally going to force her to carry the child to term unless the state protects her. And I maintain, in a lot of middle class areas, the parents are far more likely to force the kid to have an abortion because they're embarrassed and, et cetera. I don't know how you determine it statistically, but it's tough stuff.
Well, statistically, isn't it true that there's no real difference in abortion rates, whether you're Catholic or not?
Yeah.
Now,
it is true.
now if the Catholic Church wants to do something about it, that is possibly the area of real pastoral care and pastoral education towards pastoral care. We're not going to get it by shouting louder from the pulpit, joining Father Altman in simply, condemning people who might favor abortion to hell, along with all Democrats. I think that, we are going to get it by fostering a Christian community within which life is respected. And if life is respected in all of its stages, it's going to be respected in its origins too.
Yeah. Right now, there's this vindictiveness, I suppose, on both sides, but especially it seems to be on the right to lifers. Like the kid crosses state lines, gets an OB in Indiana, who performs an abortion that's valid under Indiana law, and they say, aha, I'll bet she or he, I forget the gender, didn't register that abortion. Let's prosecute him or her. And they're actually running down that path, including the Attorney General of the state of Indiana, whom the doctor is now suing for defamation. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, it's getting ugly.
Can we turn our attention to something of a different note here? Because, this Webb telescope, Bob, I found out on the the website of your Association of Catholic Priests, that you had given some talks in April on Earth Day, taking Earth Day seriously, and you talked about we as earthlings and so forth. And so I was curious, how have these Webb telescope photos affected your views in any way, or your sense of reality or theology or anything like that?
Take a look, Bob. You may. I'll get out of the way, and you may.
Yeah, there you go. But this is almost as big as the Copernican revolution, or finding out that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and we revolved around the sun, and now we're finding out that our little galaxy is one among so many.
Yeah.
And it's hard to conceive of the distances and the time and all that. And what if there were beings on another planet? Was there another incarnation there? Was Jesus busy hopping around from planet to planet?
Well, there might have been an incarnation with an earthling, and then another incarnation with a zebra someplace out there in outer space.
Earthling.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think that there's a great deal of speculation about all that, and at this point, from my understanding, there's really no clear, firm sense that there's life elsewhere out in this universe, huge and mammoth as it is. And it's a great mystery in any kind of respects. But I think, our faith is that there's something special here that we are, and we need to recognize that, and we need to protect life on this planet, the ability of planet to sustain life, that we have a responsibility there. There's a sister that was one of those 2 webinars that I aired. It was actually a talk that was given. I'm going to blank on her name. She was from the Catholic Theological Union. She's a kind of a scripture scholar, and she's very engaged, and she's still up and out and around, but she's semi-retired from being a professor. I think that it's, in a sense, a whole different sense. We're in the process as a human community overall of little by little setting us up all to get killed.
Mhm.
They set these goals. The states have set these goals because they know what is happening. The scientists have made that very clear, and they sign these documents, and then they don't measure up to them. So, here in the United States, Manchin just shot the whole thing that was out there, shot it down. He was the last guy that they needed to get to support it, and a couple of others to get in. It's not a problem, we'll let it go. So what are you having? You're having drought, where food is going to be less, water is going to be less, people are going to be living in 110, 120 temperature places, and many people are going to die because of that. And if that thing isn't slowed down and reversed, it's just going to get more and more of everybody and everything that's living on this planet. So I'm not sure what you're asking of us there. I think in faith, with a deep sense that God is the creator, and however life has come about, so don't get into the worry about the soul or the personhood, but we know that there's life here, but it can be destroyed. And so, I think we need to be serious about that and work on people getting a stronger sense of responsibility, of their own ability to think and to take seriously and to form their conscience of what's the right thing for them to do. And I think there's a huge way to go, because I think there still is an enormous amount of waste. There's a stance, in my opinion, what I perceive, that our stance here is, if they're not going to do any better, we're not going to do any better. The Chinese don't stop, we're not going to stop. And I think we need to take a lead. Now, I'm speaking not from a Catholic Christian, but I think there's a lot of lay people, scientists, who get what's going on, and they're the ones that are blowing the whistle. That we humans had better do something, or we're not going to be any humans. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, then there's a whole nuclear question also, nuclear proliferation, that we seem to be going. So we could even hasten the end there.
Oh, and we're building, we're putting trillions, I think it's 30 trillion or something like that, over the next 30 years, and upgrading all of our nuclear weapons. And what is Putin doing over there? Doing the same thing. What is Iran doing? They want to start their nuclear weaponry, and many other groups are trying to do that. And it's kind of to scare one another off, it seems to me, but it could all be let loose. And that would be a real mess.
Well, it almost was in 1962.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, Putin has threatened to use it if he gets seriously reversed in Ukraine. I wouldn't put it past him that he might at least use tactical nuclear weapons.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But Bob, in the larger question of, is there a need for, since the Catholic Church in large point, has been somewhat quiet about this. Is there a need for some kind of an expanded theology of creation?
Well, I'd have to leave that to the theologians. I think that the Vatican has been very much engaged in blowing the, the care for our common home whistle. I mean, they've been very assertive about that. Laudato Si and
Right.
Fratelli Tutti, those are combined.
Yeah.
And this Laudato Si movement is young people, basically young people, not only young people, from all over the world. And they are really promoting a lot of activity on the part of younger people to try to turn the thing around. So I don't think our church is being negligent at all in trying to promote that. Certainly not Francis.
Right.
But our bishops
Yeah,
not doing much.
that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're tied up in some other universe, it seems to me. I think there is some progress, but it's not dramatic. How many parishes, how many dioceses are taking it seriously and actually doing things? I just think we're contributing in a pretty meager way to the problem. So we need to keep pushing it. It does seem to me we need to get our people more aware and more willing to sacrifice the niceties of the world in which we here live.
On an unrelated note, I just got a bulletin that Bannon was convicted of contempt of Congress.
Oh, that's too bad. Oh my gosh, he's my
Yeah.
hero. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that.
Buck up, Almy. You'll be all right.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I mean, Mark Meadows was my congressman, and then oh my goodness, I just
Well,
I'm-
wait a
I'm
minute.
devastated.
Bannon was
I'm-
my parishioner.
Were we just talking about Laudato Si?
Who was your parishioner, George?
Forgive me for misusing that.
Mhm.
Who's your
Fred.
parishioner?
Fred, I was with Dr. Kennedy last night.
Bannon was Catholic and he lived in
Right.
Beverly Hills, so he was my parishioner. I don't know.
Why do you say was?
Well, I don't think he lives there anymore.
No, but you say he
I
was
neither do.
Catholic.
Well, again,
Isn't he still?
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
of course, once you're, the indelible mark on your soul, of course he's still
No,
Catholic.
but doesn't he self-identify that way too? And
Yes.
I
Still-
guess he does.
When he's cavorting with
course it's-
Ligano, he does.
George,
Yeah.
he wasn't
George, I mean, Tom, did you ever see him when you
No,
was a pastor?
not that I knew of.
Yeah,
wasn't he in Rome and tried to start some sort of thing with the what's
yeah.
it?
A monastery.
Got out of it. What was that?
Yeah, more.
He has a
recently.
monastery there called, I think it's called Dignitatis Humanae, actually, that is run by a guy in Rome. And the direction is to bring to the fore the kind of leaders like in Europe, like Orban in Hungary.
Oh, good, good.
And, to some extent, Bolsonaro in Brazil and Trump in the United States and late Boris from United Kingdom, et cetera, who wasn't exactly correctly put in that category, but yes, a new world order. And he had an initial alliance with Cardinal Burke, who, since his illness, has been very obviously absent from the debate.
Oh,
so would he see Putin as being part of that too? Kind
Yes,
of a-
indeed, actually, George. Yeah, how could
Yeah.
I forget?
Yeah. So there's a certain militancy to his
Yes,
viewpoint. Yeah.
very much. Well, his program is called The War Room.
Oh, uh-huh.
His TV program.
Is it?
That's the name of it, The War Room.
Yeah.
who's
Fred, I was
George?
with Dr. Kennedy last night, and he was asking for you.
Oh, thank you.
So he wants your email address, and I'll send you his. So I'll send him yours and you his.
Okay, great. I still have a seminary one. I don't know whether.
Yeah, no, he's not. He lives at St. Mary's in Dedham. He's retired. So
Okay.
Who is that?
So I'll send them both to either one.
Thank you very much.
As they say, "O admirabile commercium."
Who were you referencing there, Frank?
Arthur Kennedy.
Oh, Art Kennedy, yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry. Forgive me.
No,
For,
I appreciate that you're going to do that, Frank.
okay.
Right.
But George Crook, you've got to quit bringing us such devastating, sad news on these calls, these conference calls. This is not fair that you do that. I mean, my heart's broken.
Oh, for poor Steve. What
Yeah,
are you
poor
talking
Steve.
about?
I mean,
What,
Yeah.
what will be the penalty, George, for?
I think it's trivial. I'm not
Well,
sure.
it's a year on each count, and there's 2 counts. So the
Oh.
potential is 2 years in prison, but he probably won't get that. But I think he'll get some time.
So Tim,
From
you're going on your,
lips to God's ear.
yeah, let's hope.
Tim, when do you go on your Oregon Trail thing?
We are leaving August, 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks from today, we will be assembling with all the other wagon trains in St. Joseph, Missouri.
Okay,
And this is a completely trivial thing compared to our conversations of the day. But I've been reading this book about the early pioneers, and it was a 6-month trip from Missouri to Portland, Oregon, where they were eventually ending up. They didn't ride in wagons; they walked because the wagons were filled. The wagons are small; they are 4 feet by 6 to 8 feet, about 2 feet high, and pulled by oxen. They didn't have horses; they had oxen. And if someone got sick, they would make room for them in the wagon, or little babies. And can you imagine walking across the prairie and then across the Rockies for 6 months? And these wagon trains, and that's what I read as some diaries from one of the first wagon trains in 1840, 1841, 1842. There would be like 500 wagons in these trains. And in 1 year, 40,000 people left from St. Joe and went to Oregon. The courage that it must have taken, it's just astonishing to me.
and how many arrived?
Most of them, because the Indians, yeah, there was very little evidence at any time of hostile Indians, because the Indians were much more interested in trading. The Indians, and they would have these areas where they would have prearranged exchanges, where the Indians would bring in pelts, furs, and things like that in exchange for beads, or exchange for weapons, or even sometimes in exchange for chicken pox. And there are a number of examples of whole small tribes that got completely wiped out within a year or 2 of the visitation by the Oregon trades. Yeah, because these guys, these Indians, the Native Americans, were really not at all exposed to any European-derived diseases, so they were very vulnerable. It'd be like someone who's just had chemo or your whole susceptible. So I'm looking forward to it, and there are hundreds and hundreds of miles.
I hope you're vaccinated.
I am. Yeah, I am. And there are hundreds and hundreds of miles of ruts still very evident on the prairie. Yeah, and so it's going to be fun.
How many of you?
Take some Sacagawea dollars with you.
David, are you doing this in a real wagon, or are you taking your camper, your?
Taking my Airstream. Yeah. And if you guys, and I'm hopeful that occasionally on a Friday afternoon, no matter where I am, that I can stop and, find a good internet source and link up with you guys.
But Tim, now, how long will it take you to get from St. Joseph, Missouri to Portland, Oregon?
35 days.
Oh, 35 days.
Yeah, but we're going
following this trail, or no?
Yeah, essentially following the trail. And I mean, you can't be on the trail, but the highway system through northern Nebraska, through northern Missouri, southern Nebraska, then goes into Wyoming, and then goes into southern Idaho, then into Oregon. The highways have essentially been following the Oregon Trail. It's interesting.
Huh.
And in the area of North Carolina where I live, when I moved here from South Florida, where all the roads are straight, north, south, east, west, I'm trying to, why are all these windy roads? And I said they were all cow trails. They used to be cattle trails, and I think it's probably the same up in New England, where a lot of the roads were just where people would bring their cattle or their livestock, and so the road was sort of made and the trees were cleared and all of that. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm really, really looking forward to it. So there's going to be 20 Airstream trailers, Gary. So there'll be 40, 45 people on the tour,
Tim, so you've got a truck that you pull the Airstream with.
Yeah.
Why
So
is
it's
it
gonna
going
be
to
fun.
take so many days to do this?
Well, because the places that we stop are usually historic sites or museums or national historic parks, that kind of thing. And so they combine the traveling with a lot of history. And so in each place, they try to have a local historian. Sometimes that can be someone from a local college. The couple that is leading the caravan has done it, I think, 4 or 5 times. They have published a lot of information on, all right, when you are in Laramie, Wyoming, this is where we're going to go. Like we start out, actually, the first 2 nights were at the Pony Express Museum, where the Pony Express first started. And so it's just, I love history. So I think it's going to be a kick.
Oh, it
It's gonna
sounds
be a kick.
terrific.
Yeah.
Well,
Bravo.
Tim, send us pictures. You may not be able to join us live, but send us pictures from along the
That's a
way.
great idea.
Well, there's a way to do it. I mean, if you guys are on Facebook, the caravan has a Facebook page that I can invite you to, because people are posting stuff. If that is any interest to you, send me an email and that you have, or let me know that you have a Facebook. And we've got friends right now that are in Denali in Alaska. They're on our caravan. We have friends who are in Newfoundland who are on a caravan. And I just love seeing the comments and the photos that these people are posting up on Facebook. It's just really, really a blast. It really is.
When you're in one of these caravans, do all of you get into the same park for the overnight, or do you have several different places that have been scheduled?
Well, given that you've done the RVing, we all stay caravan. We all are able to stay in the same park every night.
Wow.
And but we always spend at least 2 nights in a park, Bob. We're not park to park to park. It's like 2 nights. In some cases, we're 3 nights. But the provision is we cannot travel together. You can't travel in a herd of Airstream trailers because you drive the truckers crazy. And so they stage us when we leave a campground. 2 or 3 can go, and then 15 minutes later, 2 or 3 can go.
Okay.
So you're not tying up traffic,
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Is there,
Unlike the
given you
motorcycle.
start in St. Joseph, Missouri, is there any intersection with the Mormon track to Idaho?
It follows, yeah, it does. The California, the Mormon Trail, and the Oregon Trail are all the same until you get to some point in either most northeastern Colorado or southwestern Nebraska. I'm not sure. Yeah, they all kind of went together.
All right, yeah.
And as a guy who has a lot of economics in my background, I'm just fascinated by the amount of industry that had to be created in St. Joe to just finance and to give the supplies to these thousands and thousands of wagons that were going every year. I read a comment about the friend sent me there up in Alaska now. about the gold rushes, the wealthiest people in the towns were the guys who were selling the pickaxes. They were not the gold miners; they were the guys selling the pickaxes. So we're looking forward to it.
I would think,
Speaking of
yeah.
which, on a slightly different angle, George Ferrick, you recommended this book on the Trump family, the Trump origins.
Right. Yes.
And Donald Trump's grandfather basically went from Germany to, what was it, Seattle?
Well, he was in San Francisco,
Well,
maybe too. Yeah. Or
Yeah,
someplace.
basically following the money or the miners to profit from them with restaurants and other amenities that lonely miners would need.
On the upper floor.
Yeah. So.
Oh, I get what you're saying, Ferrick.
Donald Trump's entrepreneurial history goes way back from German origins.
And the upper floor one does too.
Oh yeah.
How true, Gary. How true.
The scarlet cord hanging out the window of the wall.
So Tim,
you guys,
what year was that Oregon Trail thing? Do you recall?
It started in 1840s.
Okay.
And it went for about 25 years.
Okay.
And the United States was brilliant back then. In the ability of the nation to give land to people who would go and would create some value in the land. Like, my grandparents came to South Dakota under the Homestead Act. They got 160 acres. I don't know. I think probably Tom, by the time your family came later on, I don't know if the Homestead Act was still available, but that was a beautiful, well thought out program. So anyways, we used to do things
the Trump book?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Make America Great.
What was the name of the Trump book?
I'll email it out. Have you been reading it, Tom, or no?
Great.
Yeah, I've been getting it. Actually, I rent it free on archive.org.
Okay.
The Internet Archive, and so I'll rent it for an hour at a time. And
are you enjoying it? Isn't it kind of well written?
it's well written.
Interesting.
It gives a lot of background, a lot of the a lot of the Pacific Northwest lore of that time too, which I found interesting.
It's not Born Trump Inside America's First Family, is it?
No, it's about, it has 3 generations in its subtitle. Yeah.
You'll email it, won't you?
Yeah, I'll email.
Thanks, George.
Okay, so I'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I've got to go prepare my martini.
Better go and do that. Enjoy the anchovies.
For dinner.
Take care of this.
God bless you all.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
I am ending the meeting. 1, 2, 3. Bye-bye.
Bye.